Good afternoon, how you doing? My name is Ben Woosterberg, and this is my booktube channel. We're calling it Scribbler because I don't know what else to call it, and that hooks up to my Substack page and all of that stuff. Anyways, this is this is my second take at this. I got 20 minutes into this, and I screwed up so bad. I was doing that. I coughed, and it's like, oh god, and I would screw up the words and shit. So it doesn't matter. Anyways, I'm reading this from my office, from my study, my library, and I'm going to be reading it out to you and inviting inviting Anthony Hopkins to come along and read for me. I would like it if he read for me because, well, you know, he's got such a great voice, doesn't he? And, wow, he's Anthony Hopkins. Can you just imagine? I mean, he was here 2 months ago, I guess. Maybe 3, I don't know. December, January. I guess that's even longer now, isn't it? Yeah, something like that. He was in town, Vancouver, by the way. I live in Vancouver. And I guess he was making a movie or something. And so... nah, missed opportunities. Life is full of them. Anyways, I'm sending this out to him, and I'm thinking that somewhere out there, someone might know him. 6 degrees of separation. So, you know, someone knows someone who knows someone who knows someone. And that's only 3. So, who knows? One day, I will get someone here, and they will read. But what they can do, if you have an Apple, you just go on the, what's that called? Photo Booth app. You turn it on like I am right now, and you just do a cold reading, which is what I do all the time. And so that's why sometimes I have to start over again because I screw up. Or the phone rings, or, you know, someone knocks at the door and I have to leave. Or maybe the wife comes home, which is very possible. Anyways, I'm going to read this, and I'm going to try and read it properly. I'll slow down, and I'll take my time, and I'll get it done. Alrighty, here we go. The Bashful Courtesan, Chapter 5, Paris, 1944. The Allied landing at Normandy on June 6, 1944, is a matter of record. 2 months later, the Allies landed in Provence, breaking through the German lines and making their way to Paris. That's also a matter of record. But it didn't quite happen the way it was reported, did it? By that I mean it wasn't the Gaul that led the troops into battle, staving off a German assault the way people are led to believe. In fact, it didn't happen that way at all. That just proves to you that history is written by the victors. He was there, of course. There's that famous picture of him walking down the Champs-Élysées. So how can I deny it? But to say that picture was taken the day after. I'll be the first one to say I was never what you'd call a big supporter of de Gaulle, but then you probably already figured that out about me. The only reason he's lauded as the hero of France is because he won his major battles on the political front. He says he was forced to become the spokesman of for France because he was the only high-ranking military officer left. Who needs ambition when the chain of command is the only thing that matters in the end? Maybe now you'll believe me when I tell you the man knows how to play a crowd. I have it on high authority, never mind where I got it from, and just trust me that I have it, but the general consensus of Allied high command was that any attempt at liberating Paris would come at too high a price. It would take too much time. That's the only thing they didn't have to spare. Time. It was the beginning of the race for Berlin. And their one thought was to beat the Russians into Berlin because they could see nothing but trouble coming with that. One dictator's as good as the next, I always say. They knew the Russians were bent on destroying Germany. Eisenhower and that lot, the Allies, and not just destroying it, but crushing it and turning it into what would have been their first communist satellite state. Well, they couldn't have that, could they? They were doing their fair share of raping and pillaging, too, from what I understand. The Red Army, I mean. Which, of course, is no different from any other invading army I know of. All the same, the Allies convinced themselves they had to protect the world from the communist threat. After that, it's easy to understand their reasons for wanting to bypass Paris, and when you take into account the cost of munitions or the resources they'd have had to expend, it does seem more prudent to come back later, doesn't it? That was Eisenhower's way of saying the cost in human lives would be too great, which was part of what made him a great military commander. And who knows, maybe he was right. The cost of taking the city would have been enormous, but de Gaulle would never know about any of that, or even suspect that not liberating Paris was a snub by Allied High Command. We'd refused to defend the city when the Germans first walked in, so why would Allied High Command think we'd help them now when it came to taking it back? Petty, I know, but still. Of course, German command tried keeping word of the Allied invasion quiet, but they were too late. Word of the invasion had already seeped out. There was what could only be described as an air of widespread optimism among the population, while at the same time there was general panic among the troops. They had their orders, face the oncoming juggernaut, and never surrender. The withdrawal of that many troops all at once left the numbers in Paris at 20,000. Now, there was a genuine feeling of optimism. And that brings us to the leaders of the resistance. I say leaders of the resistance, but we have to say it for what it was. There was more than one group of partisans when it came to what people think the resistance was, or what it stood for. The resistance came from different economic levels and political leanings. They were émigrés, academics, students, aristocrats, conservative Catholics, your basic priests and nuns, Jews, Muslims, liberals, anarchists, and communists. Do you really think you're going to get a group as diverse as that to agree on anything? Of course, they all worked independently of each other, but someone had to take charge, even if it was just to say no. That man was Jean Moulin, de Gaulle's man. As I said, there were several factions involved when it came to the so-called partisans. People started calling it l'Armée de Française République, romanticizing it, and really, how could you? They weren't a cohesive group, not even close. They barely acknowledged each other and often worked against each other unknowingly. I knew very little about the resistance and wanted to keep it that way. The only name I knew was that of Aramis, the name of a one-time leader with the academics. I knew a great many academics, but had no idea it was also the name of a resistance group. Aramis was betrayed, followed in quick succession by Porthos, Athos, Lady de Winter, and finally D'Artagnan. They all died through betrayal. I heard the Gestapo could be very convincing. That was when the Germans swept in, and the next thing you knew, you were living your life under the rules of occupation. It was a time when people stood up for what was right and dared to think about fighting back. It didn't matter that they had no weapons. They took their weapons from the soldiers they killed as they went about sabotaging. The most popular of the academic resistant leaders was a man commonly referred to as Renaissance. No one knew who he was. Someone said he spoke 5 languages, and that was all it took. The legend was created. It was then said he listened to classical recordings, and he was said to be ruthless when it came to reprisals. He was by far the most successful of the partisan leaders. The man had become a myth over the course of the last year. Word of his exploits were spoken of in cafes and bistros lining the boulevards of Paris. Some men claimed to have met him. They said he only had one arm, which he'd lost during the Great War. Others said he only had one leg and used a crutch. Others that his face had been blown apart and he wore an ivory mask, or maybe it was silk. Some even said he was a woman. Whatever the truth was, the Gestapo had been tracking him unsuccessfully for the last 5 months before the invasion. I don't think we could say that D-Day came as a surprise to anyone. In fact, I'd say it was only a matter of time. We'd been waiting since Dunkirk. The weather over the last week had been uncooperative, with high seas and rough winds under a full moon, which obviously had something to do with the delay. Not knowing what day it was, knowing what day it was coming, worked in favor of the Allies as well. It's hard to betray a plan if you don't know when it will be launched. German control over Paris was faltering. We could all sense it. 100,000 Parisians turned out July 14th for a prohibited celebration of Bastille Day, something we'd never dared do 2 years earlier. And while German soldiers fired their guns in the air in an attempt to disperse the crowds, the French police stood back and did nothing. When the Allies broke through in Provence, half of the 80,000 railroad workers in the city went on strike. It had the result of stopping all railroad traffic. That same day, the Paris police went on strike as well. Gas and electricity were cut off. The metro stopped running. Everyone was quick to say Renaissance organized the strikes, and if it was him, my estimations of the man increased unabashedly. But then again, any time there was a confrontation with the German people, with the Germans, people said it was at the hand of Renaissance. Excuse me. It was in retaliation. No, that isn't the word German High Command used, but retribution, when they ordered 3,000 resistance fighters held in various Paris jails, loaded into boxcars and sent to the death camps at Buchenwald and Ravensbrück. I knew this for a fact because I watched them being loaded onto the rail cars that night. I may very well have been on one of those trains myself had circumstances been different. Still, I knew 4 of the prisoners personally. They all lived in my neighborhood. Later, I learned that of the 3,000 prisoners, only 27 returned home at the end of the war. None of them were my neighbors. It was the 19th of August when the resistance made its move. In early pre-dawn light, when the only sound was songbirds echoing through empty, cadaverous streets, they cut down the trees lining the boulevards. At the same time, they began tearing up paving stones and using them for barricades while occupying government buildings and headquarters of collaborationist newspapers. Their efforts were meant to split the remaining German forces in half. The Paris police also took part in the uprising. 1,000 men occupied police headquarters on the Ile de Cité. Scattered sniper fire and street fighting broke out between the Germans, the Milice, they were the fascist military groups supporting the Nazis, and various resistance groups. Prisoners were executed in plain sight on both sides. The resistance took weapons off the fallen Germans, somehow managed to capture trucks, even a tank. But both sides knew they didn't have enough military power to defeat the other. The battle for Paris had begun. I told you that in order to survive the war, I forged paintings for Eisner. I was good at it, and being good at it, I demanded Eisner feed and protect us, which he did. But as the end of the war appeared inevitable, Eisner proved himself to be wound taut. He chewed on his ivory cigarette holder, even though he didn't have any cigarettes left to smoke, and was constantly wiping his glasses clean during a day's work. I mean, to the point where he was wiping them every half an hour. He kept a linen napkin in his tunic pocket for just that purpose. Where once, I suppose, I would have said the best word to describe him would have been capable, now, with the Allies on the frontier and about to enter Paris, and the resistance harrying those remaining German forces in Paris, he was more than nervous. I was beginning to doubt if there was an endgame to his plan. I began to doubt him the moment he failed to react once he'd learned I hid the original paintings. That's when I realized he didn't know how to react. He kept meticulous notes, though. He was constantly scribbling things down in the notebook he kept in his breast pocket. He'd left it open once on a bench, and I read the tight, childlike letters, wondering what it meant. The pages were full of various names and dates, with addresses in cities as far away as St. Louis in America and Barcelona in Spain. Some of the names I recognized as museums, but I didn't know if the addresses were the intended paintings were meant to go, or where they'd come from. That's when I realized the paintings listed on the open page were the titles of the paintings I'd forged. It wasn't the artists' names that were all foreign and unpronounceable to me, but the owners' names, which were as varied as Rothschild, Bernheim, David Wheels, and even Rosenberg, the only name on the page I did recognize. He was a well-respected dealer here in Paris. He helped bring Picasso and Braque to the public eye, and all but created the Cubist movement in America, I learned later. His collection of personal paintings was only matched by Gertrude Stein's. The only difference was we knew where his collection was, didn't we? I helped create it up. There were 4 of the 9 paintings listed on the open page. He'd laid the notebook down on the bench with his pen across the page, holding it open. After excusing himself, I thought he might be testing me in his own way, I memorized the names on the page. I felt certain he wouldn't suspect me of looking at the notebook. As far as he knew, I struggled to speak German, and I would imagine he naturally assumed I was unable to read German. I suppose he thought I was just another Russian émigré hoping to escape the revolution by running off to Paris, much like a child would run off to join the circus. It seemed Paris was where most of the Russian émigrés had ended up. I didn't see the need to convince him otherwise. All I had to do was memorize the page. Madame Voland would know what to do about the rest. As I said earlier, my job at the Jeu de Paume was helping box up paintings and other priceless works of art being sent to Germany. The Paume served as a general storage area, and at one time I was working directly under the guidance of Madame Voland, who once worked as assistant curator at the Louvre. She was a tall, slender woman, quick to shed tears at what she said was the tragedy of it all. But she kept meticulous notes, secretly writing the names of every painting she came across, as well as who owned it. But the crates proved to be too large and too cumbersome for me to work with, and it was decided that I was more of a hindrance than a help. Eisner asked to have me assigned to him as his assistant. He justified it by saying that at least I spoke some German, not a lot, but enough to understand what was needed. It was an opportunity I was quick to latch onto, knowing my life was hanging in the balance. My job now involved helping him document paintings and other works of art coming in from private collections. I helped transcribe the paperwork into German. We worked in the basement of what was commonly referred to as the Martyrs' Room. It was one of several places where paintings deemed unacceptable as far as German ideals were concerned were sent to before they were shipped out for destruction. It was a holding room. That's where Eisner first came up with the idea of forging paintings more than 3 years ago. We'd send the forgeries out to be destroyed, he explained, keeping the originals. Once I understood what was expected of me, I hid the originals. I wanted to take it one step further. One step further, he asked. But what exactly does that mean, one step further? My first question is, what do you expect to do with the originals after they're forged? Do with them? What do you mean, do with them? Maybe I should ask how long you expect to hide them, I asked. He laughed a laugh that was more like a bark, which made me look up at him in time to see him wiping his glasses. He blew a small cloud of fog on the lens as he wiped. You stupid little man, do you mean to tell me you've hidden them? All of them? And what does that mean, saying your first question? With the Allies fast approaching, it seems to me you didn't have it all thought out. What? So you stole the paintings? I haven't stole them. I simply moved them and put them where no one can get them. And who do you think is going to get to them? If not the Yanks, then the Brits. Don't you see the irony in any of this? He asked, holding his glasses up to the light before slipping them on. I fail to see the irony in anything, I said. This isn't a situation where one looks for irony. Oh, please, stop. It is. I bring down paintings for you to forge. I bring you everything you need to make it work. And you do. You do it so well, in fact, that when I send them upstairs in place of the originals, your precious Madame Voland inspects them and sends them on to Germany. If you fail to give me the originals back, but you fail to give me the originals back. Instead, you gather them up and hold them hostage. You tell me you want a guarantee of food as well as my help getting out of the city. How can you not see the irony? I fail to see the irony in any of that. How long do you think you can hide them from me? If I tell you where I've hidden them, you wouldn't have to worry about getting us out of the city, would you? Us? Not telling you where I've hidden them. Hidden them is the only thing that guarantees you'll protect us. My word isn't good enough for you? You'll have to forgive me if I say no, I said, forcing a smile. The fact I haven't told you, or that blind bitch, the fact I haven't had you or that blind bitch sent off to a work camp should prove that I'm a man of my word. And the fact that I haven't exposed your little scheme should prove that I'm also a man of my word, I said, and saw him nodding, as if he silently agreed with my assessment of the situation. You say they're valuable paintings. All I can do is take your word for that. It doesn't matter that I've never heard of half of them. Like I said, I only have your word on it. My word, as an officer and a gentleman? I'm barely an officer and seldom a gentleman, but I do have a classical education. Do you? Of course I don't. I can barely read and write, and you know that. But that's not why you wanted me to work for you, is it? You've had this planned all along. I don't know if it was right from the start or if it was something you came up with later, but all you needed was an artist you felt capable of helping you pull it off. And voila! If you tell me they're all priceless works of art, who am I to say different? I believed you because Madame Voland said the same thing. She did she? And her words mean more to you than mine? What if I said it did? I smiled. After all, that's why she's here, isn't it? She used to be at the Louvre before the war. She'd had a classical education as well. That's a curious choice of words, the fact you'd be willing to take her word over mine. Perhaps you feel because I'm not in charge. I'm simply a German soldier and nothing else. I'm the Obersturmführer. Do you even know what that is? I shrugged. A German officer? Yes, but a lowly German officer, he was quick to emphasize. The only redeeming factor is that it's a rank of a lowly Nazi officer. I bet you didn't know I'm a card-carrying member of the Nazi Party, did you? Did you know you can be an officer in the regular army and not be a member of the Nazi Party? Of course, you're not going to get very far with your career as a result. Being a member of the party is a political position. I mean, you know they have their own troops. I'm sure you've heard of the SS. My brother-in-law's with the SS. He's in the East somewhere, the last I heard. I don't know exactly where or what they're doing, but you hear stories. You always hear stories, and if nobody says anything, you know there's going to be stories. They made me Obersturmführer because my long-standing membership in the party. Now, here's the irony we were looking for earlier. I only became a card-carrying member because my brother-in-law was a member. He joined right after the Great War. He was in Munich back in the 1920s. All he could talk about was how the man with the Charlie Chaplin mustache was going to change the world. He's going to make Germany great again, he said. And he did, didn't he? But at what price, I asked. What do you mean? You've all sold your souls. Is that what you believe, he asked, taking his glasses off and wiping them again before putting them back on. For a moment, I thought he might agree with me. You don't agree, I asked. I was given my position at the Pariser Platz because I was a card-carrying member of the Nazi Party. I wouldn't have amounted to anything if I wasn't a member. I had all the credentials, but I didn't have the experience. And what about the people who had all the experience but weren't card-carrying members? I'm sure there were plenty who had no interest in joining the Nazi Party. What happened to them? What do you mean, what happened to them? We're not monsters. Of course not, I said, using what could only be described as a conciliatory tone. I've laughed. I've learned that one has to take that tone with people sometimes. At least not all of us, he added, his voice somewhat softer as he looked down at his feet, trying to avoid my eyes. I think Eisner would have been the first to tell you he wasn't a soldier, not like the soldier his brother-in-law was. Being a German officer, I suppose he knew he'd always be thought of as a Nazi. Every German was thought to be a Nazi, which was why there was always the threat of him being shot as he walked to and from the martyrs' room. But he wasn't a soldier, he was quick to remind me. He was a German, though, which he knew was reason enough for anyone to shoot him. Now, with the Allies marching on the city, he knew there was an even greater chance of him being shot. He felt it was imperative to find those paintings. The reason he'd been put in charge of packaging, labeling, and registering the artwork left in the martyrs' room was because of his familiarity with different genres. He could distinguish between a Dutch master and a German romantic. He was familiar with French, English, Dutch, and Spanish artists, knew the difference between Impressionists and Post-Impressionists. He could tell you what Expressionism was, Modernism, what abstract, Cubism, Surrealism were. He knew about Eastern painting, which meant he knew how to distinguish Chinese art from Japanese prints. He was the perfect man for the job. His job did not include choosing what was going where or moving something from here to there. That was a job for someone else. He was in charge of labeling, documenting, packaging, and storing works of art before they were shipped off to be destroyed. He'd gone through thousands of pieces over the last 3.5 years. "I'll bet you didn't know I studied art, did you?" he said. "And by that I mean serious art." "Do you know what I mean by serious art? The Italian Renaissance and the Romantic Age? As far as anyone is concerned, that's real art, not the stuff you and your degenerate artists paint. And it's not just we Germans who feel that way about it either. People all over the world pretty much feel that way. You know they mean Picasso when they say modern art, the most degenerate of the degenerate movement. Why the hell he's still allowed to paint, I don't know. He should be locked up somewhere, or maybe forced to work here," I said. "Oh, would you rather be starving with everyone else then?" he asked, forcing a smile as he paused to wipe his glasses. "I'd rather be painting," I suggested, "like Picasso. And that's exactly why you're not painting. Nobody likes Picasso's work. Wanting to paint like him is why you've been classified as a degenerate artist. You just said they let Picasso carry on with his painting. Why not me?" "You do paint," he said with a laugh, "and I pay you handsomely for it." "It's my name, isn't it?" "What do you mean by that? What's wrong with your name?" "Why, who was it that said, what's in a name? Romeo, Juliet? I don't know, one of the two. Pumilio. Do you know what it even means? It's Latin for dwarf. I've been labeled a degenerate artist because someone thinks my work should be banned. My work was being called innovative by the critics before the war. I don't believe my work has anything to do with why they did it. I think it's because I'm a dwarf. I'm a freak of nature. I don't stand up to German standards of what the perfect man is. Do you know, I've seen 4 of my paintings down here. 4. My paintings are here because I'm a freak. There's no other reason." "That's not true. You were looked on as a Fauvist in the Post-Impressionist age. There were things about your brushwork, they said. They said it was harsh and angry." "Harsh and angry? Of course it's harsh and angry. Has anyone thought to ask why I should be such a harsh and angry man?" I laughed. "And yet, with all these paintings here, I've only found 4 of mine. 4. I painted far more than that. Where are the rest? Your painting, The Dog in the Gardens of the Luxembourg, is considered a masterpiece in the post-Fauvist style. Now I'm a post-Fauvist. You just said I was in a post-impressionist age. It doesn't matter though, does it? I suppose I was post-impressionist at one time or another. It's all the same though, isn't it? It's all classified as degenerate art. You burned our work in a bonfire, for Christ's sakes. How many of mine do you think have been burned? It's hard to put you into any one category. But these other styles, I don't care for them much. The Dadas, the right considers Dadaism to be degenerate art. Oh, am I classified as a Dadaist as well?" I asked, trying not to smile. "You're definitely not a Dadaist." We were speaking French. He liked speaking French, he said. French was the language of the angels, and he preferred it to the guttural tones of his own German. I told him that I had to agree with him. However, I thought it was probably more prudent of me not to tell him I was fluent in German. It was better to let him think, as he did, that I came to Paris after the Great War, having escaped the Russian Revolution. It was probably in my best interest not to tell him about my life in Vienna. To him, I was just an artist, and even though my work was classified as degenerate, he said I was a man who should be celebrated for things I'd done, such as making my way to Paris with a blind woman in tow. He said it was the reason he'd asked that I work for him, rather than being sent off to the camps. I showed grit and determination. There would always be the threat of being sent to the camps. which was one of the main reasons why I kept the paintings hidden from him. Artist, dwarf, freak, degenerate forger, I mumbled. The list is getting to be quite long. And how did that get in here? Eisner said, his previous statements forgotten as he picked up a small painting hidden behind another larger painting leaning against the wall. I noticed a tear that had been repaired in the top right-hand corner of the larger painting. It looked almost as if it might have been a puncture, and told myself that the painting was backwards. That meant the tear would be on the top left. The painting certainly looked big enough, I told myself. I felt my heart quicken. I want you to paint this one. Can you do it? He asked. I haven't finished with the Van Ruysdael yet, I said, walking to the larger painting and leaning it back to have a look. It was her. There, in all her glory, in all her radiant beauty, was Constanza as Cleopatra, young, alluring, beautiful, staring down at George and Novak, who were the two Romans, Caesar, Mark Antony, I couldn't even remember who it was anymore, but staring down at them with what could only be called a look of indolence. Or perhaps it was disdain. It was difficult trying to remember what I was hoping to achieve, but I felt my heart skip a beat at the sight of the painting and had to steady myself. Never mind that one. Can you paint this? Eisner asked again. What is it? It's a very famous Dutch painting, is what it is. It should have never been here. The last I heard, it was hanging in the Louvre. I'll have to see that it's returned to the French government. Returned? Why? I don't understand, I asked, distracted for the moment. I turned to look at him. Why would you return it? I doubt no one even knows it's here. Someone does. The only treasures we're permitted to take, by law, are those confiscated from personal collections. The fact this is here at all makes me think it was put here on purpose. You mean someone thought they could hide it in plain sight? Like this, I said, pulling my painting out and turning it into the light. This was taken from a museum in Vienna. How do you know that? What makes you think it's here by mistake? Do you even know who the artist was? He asked the questions in rapid succession. Of course I know who painted it. I did. You? He asked with a quick dismissive wave of his hand the moment he realized it was what it implied. You, of all people, should know that would never be considered anything close to a masterpiece. What if I told you I was once Yevgeny Tochevsky? It doesn't matter whose name is on it. It's deemed degenerate art. Look closely. Who does she remind you of? I said, ignoring him. Is that Constanza? It might be encaustic, but you can see it's her. I know it's encaustic, and that's why it's degenerate. And you say you painted it. It was a commission from before the Great War. Before the Great War? How did it get to Vienna? I painted it there. You were in Vienna? When? When? I asked. Yes, when? When were you in Vienna? No, wait. Never mind, he said quickly, taking his glasses off and wiping them. It doesn't matter when you were there, does it? Nothing matters anymore, he said, holding his glasses up to the lights before placing them on his nose. You know, something like that will never be accepted, he added, pointing at it. It's obvious it had to be marked as degenerate art and sent down to be burned. You might as well save us the bother and destroy it now. I will not, I stated. What do you want me to say? Do you want it? Is that what this is all about? If you want it, take it. As a Russian, you know they'll never allow it to be shown. Is that the reason I'm categorized as a degenerate artist? Because I'm a Russian? I can't say one way or the other. But you know as well as I do, Russia is the enemy here. Of course, Masonic, communist, and democratic organizations are just as much our enemies as the enemies at the gate. I thought you would know that. Do you mean the Allies or just the Americans? What about the Australians or the Canadians? It's not just works of art that are being confiscated. Did you know that? They're taking whole libraries from the churches, synagogues, even the Masonic temples. They're all being cleaned out. There's still a great deal for us to learn if we want to understand our enemies. Take it as you say, as if you have the power to make the decision like that. I said, using my deepest, darkest mocking tone, as if something I might say would have any bearing on the issue at hand. You'll never convince me Hitler and his lot are trying to understand the enemy, not when I see the paintings they've singled out for themselves, and certainly not when you have your idea about what you want to keep. You say everything they're confiscating will be put into a museum for the German people to study. Really? What about the paintings you've asked me to forge? What do you plan to do with those? Are you planning to let them go? How many of them have been outlawed or slated for destruction because the artist was a Jew? Maybe instead of forgeries, I should have painted originals that you discovered. You could have said you found the third Vermeer to go along with the astronomer and the geographer. A third Vermeer, he scoffed. And what would you call it? It doesn't matter what you call it. The explorer, the admiral, it doesn't matter. As long as the man in the painting is the same as the man in the other two, who would know the difference? It would be an unknown original Vermeer. And you think you can do it? It's something I've been thinking about seriously. And your price? What makes you think I want something, I asked. Because the Allies had broken through the lines and were evacuating the city? Because everything is supposed to go out tonight? Because everyone has a price, Pumilio. You have 9 paintings hidden away, my paintings, and I doubt if they're in that little studio you call home. If anything happens to me, well, the fact that I'm the only one who knows any of this means that your life is in my hands. Yes, and vis-a-vis, because I have the paintings, that means I have the future, your future, in my hands. The forgeries are probably on their way to Berlin right now, maybe even hanging on the wall in some grand official palace, and you're asking me what I want? As I said, every man has a price. And if I said I want to get out of Paris, you know that's impossible. Not without giving me the paintings. Leave them where they are. No one knows they're there. That doesn't sound like a very good plan. Then take them. But let me take this one. That would make you a thief on top of everything else you say you are, he said. He smiled. And what am I right now, if not complicit in your little scheme? How could I be a thief if I painted it in the first place? If you want it, take it. Our apartment on the Rue des Saints-Pères was just a short ride on the Metropole from the Jeu de Paume. But the Metropole had been hit with a strike, which at the time was in its 3rd day. As I walked by clutching my painting as if I were carrying an oversized rug, I could see graffiti scrawled on all the walls of the station, on its posts and pillars, large V's for victory imposed on a cross of Lorraine, painted in bright garish colors along with the names of students who had been killed over the years. The air was unusually thick and heavy, and I thought, the rain can't be far off. The stench of the city came floating on foul-smelling winds forced up the now empty tunnels. The lights were out, of course, were just not working, because the electricity had been turned off or cut off, and it gave the station an eerie, desolate feeling, which helped explain why the police would often find bodies in the tunnels. The faces beaten and unrecognizable, any tattoos the victims may have had cut off, making it impossible to say if the body was a German soldier or a French collaborator. Many of the bodies were women, victims of gang rape and reprisals for collaborating with German soldiers. As a result, there was a palpable tension that seemed to hang about the stations like a miasma of terror. People were so quick to blame, it seemed, and the first ones to be blamed were the communist resistance fighters. They defied the reprisals the Germans imposed, and that defiance had been condemned by de Gaulle, sitting in his London flat and crying out that the cost of innocent French lives was too high. He was quick to say the random assassinations the communist orders had no impact on the war. Still, the shootings continued. The imposed curfew was set for 9 p.m. and lasted until 5 a.m. If you were caught out in the streets after 9 p.m., you were shot. There was no hope of reprieve. I always made sure I was at the station no later than 6 p.m., assuring myself there were crowds I could blend into, always searching for an easy escape route in case the German patrol should happen to come by. You never knew when you might be swept up as part of the reprisals. There was safety in numbers when you went to the stations. Or perhaps it was a pervading sense of soundness that served as a salve meant to mollify the masses. Who can say? With the Allies on the march and the rail workers on strike, the city was on edge. The German commander, von Choltitz, was incensed and swore there'd be consequences if the workers didn't return to their posts. With the French police on strike, the city was on the brink of chaos. There'd be no compromises, the workers said. Not this time. The city was at a standstill. As I left the Jeu de Paume, I heard the unmistakable sound of gunfire, followed by the distant boom of big guns somewhere over the horizon. The only thing I could think of as I stepped into the now empty street was how I was stealing my own painting. I didn't have a choice other than to walk home. It hadn't occurred to me as to how I expected to carry the painting while trying to keep to the shadows and avoid German patrols, so I broke the frame apart. I pulled the nails out I'd used all those years ago, using a screwdriver and pliers, and rolled the painting into a loose tube, tying it with string. I was able to fashion a make-believe halter, allowing me to carry it on my back. I reasoned that if the paint cracked, or I damaged it in any way, I'd be more than capable of fixing it. I'd done it before. Over the years, I'd learned to avoid German patrols in my neighborhood. Paris was a pretty big city, still is, and sometimes you'd hear stories about a Jewish family that was picked up because someone suspected something and reported their suspicions to the milice. It would tear at your heart. It would tear at you hearing of such betrayals, and your heart would naturally go out to the families as you hoped the whispered rumors were just that, rumors. I suppose that's why some people still tried to do what they could to help. That's why you secretly celebrated whenever the resistance took their revenge. Sure, there were certain to be reprisals, and you hoped it wouldn't affect you or anyone you knew, but you have to make a stance at some time in your life. I made it home, but not without some degree of adventure. By that I mean I avoided what I thought were two German patrols climbing into the back of their troop trucks and preparing to leave the city. They were headed off in the direction of the big guns. I had to hide under a small set of stairs, pulling piles of rubbish in front of me, while all I could think of was not returning the painting. I thought if I left it in the open, hiding in plain sight as if it were just another piece of rubbish, no one would think anything of it. I peeked out through a spy hole I'd made and watched, waiting for the soldiers to leave. That's when I noticed there was someone following me. It made my heart skip. I can't say how I didn't notice him earlier when I was hiding in the shadows and waiting for the soldiers to leave, but I hadn't. I noticed him because he wore a German uniform. I'd been about to step out from under the rubbish when the man stepped out of the shadows himself, making his way back to the Rue de Bellechasse, where he'd last seen me walking. I didn't recognize him, although when I saw him I did recall having seen him earlier in the week. I made sure to stay behind him, keeping him in sight as I made my way to the Rue de Saint-Pierre and the Hotel Saint-Germain. Somehow I managed to fight the painting into the lift with me. I'd almost forgotten how large it was, remembering how I'd made the 4 key figures of the work larger than life-sized. At the same time, I kept replaying the day's events in my mind, breathing a deep sigh of relief as I thought how I'd finally found what I'd been looking for these past 3 years. When I was told I'd be put in the martyr's room, I was beyond hoping I might relocate my masterpiece. It was the only painting that ever mattered to me. Don't get me wrong, I'm proud of the work I've done over the years, but my style has changed and grown as much as I have over the years. Still, there's always the one painting that means more to an artist than the others. Ask Picasso which it is, and he's most likely to say Guernica. Well, one would hope he says Guernica. So finally finding what I'd been looking for left me feeling elated. That's because I was afraid it had been burned along with the other works of degenerate art in a bonfire late in 1942. It had taken place deep within the gardens of the Jeu de Paume, away from the prying eyes of the public. A great many of us wept at the sight of so many paintings being sacrificed on the twin altars of ignorance and greed. And all the while the soldiers laughed, drinking wine and adding more paintings to the pile. Obviously, as a degenerate artist, I was no longer allowed to sell or paint my work at what served as the main auction house here in Paris. A small number of artists on the degenerate list were still permitted to work, some even encouraged. It was hoped their international reputations would fund future building projects in Germany. Artists like myself, successful but never internationally respected, were prohibited from producing work of our own. My studio was in the apartment next to ours, and I entered it from behind a bookcase set on hinges in our apartment. I'd cut a hole through the wall and would crawl through it in the next room. Once in the studio, I pulled the bookcase into place with a piece of rope, securing it to the wall with a small hook. There I had a chair, an easel, and lights fixed on a wire track above me. It's where I worked on Eisner's chosen paintings. It took anywhere from 4 to 5 months for me to complete a painting. The picture itself wasn't difficult. It was always easy for me to copy someone's style to canvas. The problem was finding the supplies I needed to complete the project. I spent a lot of time making the same paints an artist would have used 300 years earlier. The one benefit of trying to paint during the war was that it forced me to look for alternative ways of making my paints. And then there was the matter of the canvas, but I left that to Eisner. I kept the original paintings hanging anonymously on the walls in various rooms throughout the hotel. While most of the paintings were Dutch masters of the Baroque age, because Eisner had a preference for them, I felt the average person would not look twice at the paintings in his room. "We have to hide," I said almost as soon as I opened the apartment door. "Someone's following me. I think I lost him, but I'm certain he knows where I live. I've seen him before, but I don't know who he is. I'm almost certain he's Gestapo, though." "What are you carrying?" Hearing me as I unstrapped the painting and placed it on the floor. "What?" I was confused for a moment. "Oh, I found it." "You found what?" "My painting, the Bashful Courtesan. I'll tell you about it later. Right now, we have to hide." "Hide?" Constanza was frightened by my sudden entry, but I'm sure she was more frightened by the frantic tone of my voice. She began wringing her hands as I started lifting the floorboards from under the throw rug in the kitchen. I helped her into the tiny space I'd made last year, tucking her dress in around the sides. "I'll be right back," I said. "Where are you going?" she asked, half sitting up. I eased her down again, trying to comfort her as best I could. "I don't have time to explain right now, but I took my old painting. I stole it. Well, anyone who was watching me would think I stole it. And I have it. And I have, I suppose. But I have to hide it somewhere because I'm being followed. I'm just going to put it in the studio next door. I'll be right back." "Yevgeny, no. I'll be right here. I promise. I'm just putting it in the studio. But I'll be right back, but I have to do it now before it's too late. It's too big to hide with this. It won't fit." I tried reassuring her that everything would be fine. It was the strain in my voice that gave it all away, though. I suppose I'd surrendered myself to the compound fear I felt growing inside of me. It was probably nothing I said when I returned, but I felt it might be better if we stayed hidden for a couple of hours. I ran to the sink, unlatched the window above it, and pushed it open, looking down into the alley 3 floors below. I ran to a small closet where I kept a length of rope and tied it to a broom handle, resting it against the window frame and hanging the rope outside. To anyone coming in, it would look as if we'd climbed out the window and made our escape. "Better safe than sorry," I said, sliding into our hiding hole. I slid the floorboards over top of us, pulling them down with 3 nails I'd left in them for that very purpose. I felt the familiar popping sound that told me the boards were in place, then pulled on the small string running the length of the floorboards, sliding the rug into place, and settled into Constanza's arm for the long, fearful wait. There you go. I'm sorry, I really stumbled a lot in there sometimes. It's like, but, I'm at 48 minutes. That's a long time to be reading and thinking like, I guess I can start this over again. It's like, I already did that once at the 20-minute mark. So I've been doing this an hour. Now it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I got to get things ready happening because, the wife's coming home from work. The breadwinner. I love that. That's fun. Yeah. Anyways, she's got a couple more years. And why shouldn't she? I mean, I told her if I have to work until I'm 65, why doesn't she? It only seems natural, doesn't it? Yeah, well, the ironies of life. Irony, there's that word again, right? Anyways, so I'm going to leave you at this, and I'll be putting this up tonight, hopefully. I don't know, it's going to take another hour and a half to download and do all that other stuff with this. So by that time, I'll be having dinner. But I'm going to post it. It will be chapter 5. So it'll be my 6. Anyways, I'm looking for subscribers. It would be nice if you subscribed. I need 1,000. Then I can monetize. I need 4,000, what do you call it? 4,000 hours of video. I'm at, I don't know, 11? I can't remember offhand. Not important. It's like one or the other, I guess. Whatever. Anyways, I'll see you next week, and hopefully I can turn this off properly. Not like I did last week. Bye.